Hello class, this is Mr. Lehman. I want to talk to you about Lesson 5, density today. Density has the formula mass over volume, and so to figure out what the mass is, remember in class we talked about we need to use the electronic balance to measure how many grams of a substance we have. So your mass will always be in grams, and your volume is talking about, well, how much space does an object take up? And so we can either use that geometric formula like length times width times height and take measurements with our ruler and plug that into our formula, or we need to measure it directly using a graduated cylinder, or we could use water displacement as we saw in our previous tutorial, and we could drop the object in and see how much the water level increases and calculate volume that way. You either have volume in milliliters or units cubic centimeters. And remember, 1 milliliter takes up the same space as 1 cubic centimeter, and so we can go back and forth on units there. So getting back to our formula, density is the mass, how much matter we have in a given space, in a given volume. So it's the amount of matter, amount of mass per unit volume. We also can rearrange this formula. If you know 2 out of 3 variables, we can rearrange it to solve for the unknown. And so mass, to get mass by itself, we're dividing by volume, so we'd have to multiply both sides by volume to get mass by itself. And so mass is equal to the density times the volume. We also can solve for volume, and so right now we're multiplying volume by density, so if we want to get volume by itself so we can solve for it, we could divide both sides by density. And so those are our 3 equations. And as we mentioned in class, we could set them into a triangle. And remember, the triangle we can use to figure out what equation we need whenever we know what we want to solve for. And so if you look at all of our equations, mass is on top. So because we never divide by mass, we put mass on top, and then density and volume go on the bottom. And so whatever we're solving for, if we're solving for mass, remember we cover that up, and then that gives us the remainder, tells us the formula. So if we cover mass up, that will tell us that our formula is equal to density times volume. Alright, let's move on. Just some other notes about density before we do a sample calculation at the end. If we have 2 objects the same size, a ping pong ball and a golf ball are the same size, the same volume. So here are 2 objects with the same volume. Just because they have the same volume does not mean they have to have the same mass. A ping pong ball is hollow. If you put it on a scale, it only weighs maybe a gram. I'm just estimating. A golf ball is filled solid with matter, and it might weigh as much as 100 grams, maybe even more. And so this is a quick comparison. There's definitely a lot more matter in the golf ball versus a ping pong ball. And so that sort of proves that objects with the same volume, the same size, don't have to have the same amount of matter. Which one's denser? Remember, density is equal to mass over volume, and so the golf ball is definitely a lot denser. This would sink in water, ping pong ball would float in water. And so remember, anything lighter, or less dense as to say, anything less dense than 1 gram per milliliter will float. Anything that is more dense than 1 gram per milliliter will sink. Alright, moving on to our next example. Here we have 2 objects that have the same mass. Both of these weigh about 2,000 grams. And so if we look here, and I'm just estimating here, if we look here, 2,000 grams, the brick is a lot more dense, so it's not going to take up nearly as much space. The basketball is going to be a lot bigger. It's filled up with air. And so, just because 2 objects have the same mass, the same amount of matter, doesn't mean they have to have the same density. Once again, the brick is denser. It's more dense than water. It will sink. The basketball is less dense than water. It will float. And then let's do a sample calculation here. What is the density? What's the density of an object with a volume of 20 cubic centimeters and a mass of 100 grams? So remember our formula, density is equal to mass over volume. So density is equal to how much mass there is, 100 grams, divided by how much space it takes up, 20 cubic centimeters. Plug these numbers into our calculator. What's listed first, what's on top, goes in your calculator first. So 100 divided by 20, and that will give you 5. And then you need to know, what are my units? Well, look at your mass. It's in grams. So it's going to be 5 grams per whatever your volume's in, which is cubic centimeters. And so 5 grams per cubic centimeter is my density. That's my final answer. That's it for today. Hopefully this helped you.